Okay, so today we're going to learn how to factor. On Friday, we actually learned how to factor when we had a greatest common factor that we could divide out of all of the pieces of our polynomial. Today, we're going to learn a little bit different way of factoring and this happens when we don't have a greatest common factor. So really important though that when we factor, we always want to first look for a greatest common factor. Take that out, divide that out if you can, and then if you cannot divide that out, then we're going to use a method that I call Tic Tac Toe to factor. So factoring a trinomial is like undouble distributing or unfoiling if you use foil when you're double distributing. The goal is to determine what two binomials can be multiplied to get the given trinomial. So if I just look at number 1, for example, I have a trinomial. I don't have a greatest common factor. I have an x squared and an x, but this 15 doesn't have an x. I can't divide out any number as far as a coefficient or a constant because this coefficient is a 1. There's nothing to divide out of 1. So at this point, I've checked for greatest common factor. I cannot do that. So now I'm going to go to this method, tic-tac-toe. So the way we're going to use this tic-tac-toe little grid here is we're going to fill in the pieces that we have, and then we're going to use the grid to kind of organize our steps so we can see what happens. All right, so the first part is to just set up your tic-tac-toe grid. So the very first term, x squared, always goes in the top left, like that. The positive 8x, the middle term, always goes in the bottom right. So this is a positive 8x. And then 15, the last term, always goes in the top middle. Okay, so then you're going to ask yourself a couple of questions, and the first question is going to be, what two factors of x, so we're going to put the two different factors right here, what two factors of x squared actually can we multiply to get x squared? So what times what will give us x squared? So hopefully we know that that's x times x, or 1x times 1x. Then we're looking for factors that will multiply to also give us 15. So what times what will give us 15? Well, we can try 15 and 1, or we could try 3 and 5. The end goal is over here that this column is going to add or subtract to give you 8. So I'll show you what happens. Let's say we chose 15 and 1. So I tried 15 and 1. I also am going to multiply across. So this column we're multiplying, middle column we're multiplying, the two rows in the middle we're multiplying. So x times 15 right here is going to give us 15x. X times 1 is going to give us 1x. And so this last column is a little bit different. This column we are always adding or subtracting. So we're trying to see, is there any way I could add or subtract 15 and 1 in either order? Could I make 1 negative or 15 negative or both of them negative to get 8? And you can't. That doesn't work. So we tried 15 and 1. That didn't work. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to try a different factor of 15. So we know 15 and 1 didn't work, so we're going to go back and we're going to try 5 and 3. Those are the only other two options that we have. So we have 5 and 3. Again, we multiply across, so 5 times x is 5x. 3 times x is 3x. And so when we look at this, if I add 5 plus 3, I get 8. These are both positive. So I'm going to leave everything positive. So my factors, this is really important, we always circle diagonally. So our factors are x plus 3, so this is kind of like a plus sign right there, x plus 3 and x plus 5. So this trinomial here, when we simplified that, we got the two binomials, x plus 5 and x plus 3. So you can either write that up here, or you could write it below it as well, wherever, either one. So x plus 5 and x plus 3. It doesn't matter what order you put those in. You could put x plus 3 first and then x plus 5. Multiplication is commutative. You can do it any order, just like 3 times 4 is the same as 4 times 3. Well, this binomial times this binomial is the same as this binomial times this binomial. Okay, so let's look at another example. So number 2, we have x squared minus 12x minus 20. So again, we're looking to fill in our tic-tac-toe grid. We always, again, first want to look for, is there a greatest common factor? Well, I don't have an x to take out of this 20 to divide out, and I can't divide out a constant because this coefficient is a 1. I can't divide anything out of that. So at this point, we go to tic-tac-toe. So we're going to put x squared, first term always goes in the top left. Negative 12x, the middle term always goes in the bottom right. 20 always goes in the top middle. The last term, the constant, always goes in the top middle. This time I didn't take the positive, I just don't put that. But if it is negative, this 12 is negative, I have to take that with it. Okay, so again, our questions that we ask ourselves are what times what will give us x squared? What are the factors? Factor means what multiplies. What are the factors of x squared? So that's going to be x times x again. Then we're looking for factors of 20, and again, remember over here, we're trying to add and subtract to get to 12. So for 20, we could write all the factors down here. We have 20 times 1, we have 10 times 2, we have 5 times 4, right? So if I'm looking at these, because I have a 1 over here and a 1 over here, this is pretty clear to see that, oh, 10 and 2 somehow is going to give me 12. 5 and 4 would not, 20 and 1 would not. So let's use 5 and 4. So 5 times 4, actually it's not 5 times 4, it's 10 and 2. So 10 and 2. So multiply across, x times 10, or 10 times x is going to be 10x. And 2 times x, or x times 2, is going to be 2x. So now we have to figure out how do I get negative 12 out of 10 and 2. So again, in this column, this last column, the reason I put this at the bottom is because this one is the one that's different. We're adding and subtracting here. So the way we would get a negative 12 is actually if we added these and they were both negative. So 10 plus 2 is 12, so to get a negative 12, we need to make both of them negative. If I make these negative, this is really important. If I make these negative, I carry that negative over to the middle. So I'm going to put that negative both on this 10 and this 2. Say I only made one of these negative, I would only carry it over into that one piece. All right, and then this middle column is really important that you always go back and check this. Now we need to see, is negative 2 times negative 10 still a positive 20? And it is. A negative times a negative is still a positive. So that still works out. We always need to go back and check this middle column though. Okay, so our factors then are x minus 2 and x minus 10. Again, you can put those in any order. So if you wanted to put the x minus 10 first and then x minus 2, that works. Okay, let's do one more example with a leading coefficient of 1. So we'll do number 3 here. So number 3, again, we want to first look for greatest common factor. I don't have a greatest common factor. I don't have a number to divide out. I can't take an x out of this 8. It doesn't have an x. At that point, we go straight to factoring. So, or tic-tac-toeing, factoring by tic-tac-toe. Okay? So we're going to put x squared. The first term always goes in the top left. Negative 6x, the middle term always goes in the bottom right. 8, that's positive, always goes in the top middle. From here, we're asking ourselves our questions. What are the factors that I can multiply to get x squared? Well, that should be x times x. This column, what are the factors I can multiply to get 8? I have a couple of options. I can use 8 times 1. I could use 4 times 2. I know I'm trying to get to negative 6 over here. So if I'm using 8 and 1, that could give me 9. It could give me 7. Could give me negative of both of those as well. That doesn't work. So 4 and 2, I know can get me to 6. So I'm going to use 4 and 2. So 2 times 4 is 8. So now I multiply across. 4 times x is 4x. 2 times x is 2x. So how do I get a negative 6 out of a 4 and a 2? Well, this 6 is bigger than both of these. It's larger than both of those. So I have to actually make both of these negative. So when I make both of these negatives, now I would add them together and keep the negative sign. So if I make both of these negative, then I'm going to carry those negatives over to the middle. I always check that middle column one more time. Is negative 2 times negative 4 positive 8? And again, it is. A negative times a negative is a positive. So our factors this time are x minus 2 and x minus 4. So x minus 2 times x minus 4. Again, in whichever order you would like. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead. We're going to do some of those in class together. Let's look at some of the ones on the other side. So we're going to go to number 7, maybe. Let me zoom out. I can probably see better. There we go. Number 7. So this one is a little bit different because now we have what is called a leading coefficient. So this number is leading because it's in the front, but it's not a 1 anymore. So now we have a 7x squared. So we have to kind of take a little bit more consideration in for that 7. Again, I'm always going to look for a greatest common factor. Well, I cannot divide any one number out of 7, 9, and 2. None of them have a common factor. I cannot divide an x out of 2. So at this point, then we go to factoring by tic tac toe. So I'm going to put 7x squared. The first term always goes in the top left. 9x, the middle term always goes in the bottom right. 2 always goes in the top middle. The last term, the constant, goes in the top middle. So now we're looking for factors not only of x squared, but of 7. So we want to know what are the factors that we can multiply here and here in these two boxes that would give us 7x squared. Well, 7 is prime, so that's nice because we only have one option. The only possible option is 7x and 1x. And then 1x, normally we would just put x. So you can put the 1 if you want, not really necessary. 2 is also prime. We only have one option. The only way to get 2 is to multiply 1 times 2. But here is where you have a choice. You could put 2 in the top box, and then you would be multiplying it by 7, or you could put 2 in the bottom box, and you'd be, or the middle box, I guess, actually, and you'd be multiplying it by 1. So let's think about that. If I put 2 here and 1 here, I'm going to get 14x when I multiply across and 1x. Well, I can't use 14 and 1 to get to 9. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to switch it. So instead of 2 in the top with a 7, I'm going to put 1 and 2 that way. So now multiply across, 7x times 1 is 7x, 1x times 2 is 2x, and so now we're looking at how can I get 9 out of 7 and 2. Well, we get 9 out of 7 and 2 if they're both positive, and all we're doing is adding those. So 7 plus 2 is 9. So I don't need to move any negatives over because these are all going to be positive. So at this point, I have my 2 factors. Again, we circle diagonally. This is why we circle diagonally, because 7x needs to go with the 2. On the other ones, it didn't really matter, but I always circle diagonally just to make sure. Again, this is a plus right there. So we have 2 factors, 7x plus 2 times x plus 1. All right, let's do one more with the leading coefficient. So we'll do number 8. So we have 3x squared plus 5x minus 2. Look for greatest common factor. There isn't one. We go to tic-tac-toe method. So 3x squared goes in the top left, 5x in the bottom right, negative 2 in the top middle. So we're looking for the factors that we can multiply here and here in these two boxes to get 3x squared. So 3 is prime. Our only options are 3x and x. 2, we're actually trying to get a negative 2. I ignore the negative for just a minute. We're going to come back to that. So now I'm looking for what 2 factors will give me 2. Well, 2 is prime, so I only have 2 and 1. I get to choose, though. Do I put the 2 in the top box and multiply by 3, or 2 in the bottom box and multiply by 1? So let's say I do this, 1 and 2, like that. Multiply across, 3x times 1 is 3x. X times 2 is 2x. If I add 3 and 2, I get 5. Everything looks good, except when I go back and I check this middle column. Well, 2 times 1 doesn't give me negative 2, and I didn't make either of these negative to carry over a negative. So while this looks like it's going to work, it doesn't actually work. So we always, always, always want to go back and check this middle column. So that didn't work, so now I'm going to go back and I'm going to switch these. Instead of 1 here and 2 here, I'm going to switch and put 2 on top and 1 on the bottom. So switch these. So now 2 here and 1 here, multiply across. 3x times 2 is 6x. X times 1 is 1x. So to get 5 out of 6 and 1, you actually have to subtract 1. So I'm going to subtract this 1. If I make this piece negative, then I'm going to carry that negative over to the 1 in the middle column. And now I'm going to check this middle column one more time. Is now negative 1 times positive 2, negative 2. So a negative times a positive is in fact a negative. So now it all checks out. So our factors are going to be 3x minus 1 and x plus 2. Okay, so we're going to do more of this in class, but I hope that gets you a head start on knowing what to do. If you're absent, please come in for Win and get some help from me or Mr. Johnson or Miss Avila. All three of us are here to help you.